Welcome to State of the State. I'm Darlene DeRezzo, and I'm in conversation with Mary Goff. Today we are celebrating Women's Veterans Day, June 12th. Welcome.
Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you for being here. May I call you Mary?
You certainly may.
Right. First things first, let's have you introduce yourself to our audience.
In 1967, myself and 3 different nurses decided to join the Army Nurse Corps. Our second year, a sergeant, a recruiter had come and said, we'll pay you $100 a month if you give us 2 years of service. Mm-hmm. That sounded pretty good to me because there were several kids in my family that were going to be in college, and we all wanted new cars.
Ooh.
Now, the big question we all had, and we knew our parents would ask us, would we get sent to Vietnam?
Yeah. Yeah.
The answer was no. There are too many people that volunteer for Vietnam. You'll never get to go to Vietnam.
Yeah. What year was this, Mary?
I'm sorry, 1967.
Okay, 1967.
1967. After a short basic training where we learned to do things like march, salute, do a tracheotomy on a goat in case we had to in battle, mm-hmm. which nurses didn't. Mm-hmm. My 3 friends received orders to Vietnam, mm-hmm. and I received orders to the 249th General Hospital in Japan, which received the wounded from Vietnam. Once they were wounded in Vietnam, if they could go back to duty within a month, they kept them in Vietnam.
Okay.
Otherwise, they sent them to us.
Okay.
The 249th was a 1,000-bed hospital, 60 beds per ward, 1 nurse and 1 corpsman.
Wow.
Was responsible for all of the care. Mm-hmm. I grew up very fast.
Yeah, how old were you at this point?
I turned 22.
22.
In Japan.
In Japan. Any part of you frightened, excited, anxious?
I think I was too naive to be frightened.
Yeah.
It was the first time I was away from home. Mm-hmm. Communication was just by snail mail. And I just, I wanted an experience, and I loved nursing, and I wanted to be part of something.
Wow. Okay. Now, you brought some fun facts with you today, right, to share. So today's actually the 75th anniversary, right, in recognition of the Women's Armed Services Integration Act, right? That's granting military women a permanent place in the military.
Correct.
And do you consider yourself?
Do I consider myself
a military woman?
For a long time, I identified myself specifically as a nurse mm-hmm. who was in the Army.
Okay.
I knew I was a veteran, but I never thought about applying for benefits until I needed new hearing aids, and the price of hearing aids was basically 3 months of Social Security.
They're expensive, yes.
Then I met Dora,
mm-hmm.
who is a dynamo, as you know,
mm-hmm.
and she convinced me to speak about one of my stories through her when the PACT Act was signed.
Okay.
I listened to that conference. Before I went to bed that night, I just checked Facebook, and there was a picture of a young woman in tears by a grave marker. It was my friend Kay, who I went to nurses training with, who went to Japan, who died 20 years ago to the day that the pact was signed. Wow. From Agent Orange.
Wow.
So it was definitely a moment, and it made me realize I needed to talk a little bit more. And mm-hmm. although Dora spoke for me the first time, I'm mm-hmm. speaking for myself now. Mm-hmm. And encouraging all female veterans. Once you serve a day in the service, as long as you are honorably discharged, you are a veteran. And I still identify myself as an Army nurse, but yes, I am a veteran.
Okay. So you want to start with some fun facts first, and then some maybe not so fun facts?
Oh, fun facts?
fun facts, and then we'll get on to some not so fun.
Oh, fun facts, that's hard. I think probably something, it's not really a fun fact, but one question people ask me is, weren't you ever homesick?
Oh, yeah.
And I really never was. Mm-hmm. There were times I thought about home Christmas Eve, for example. Mm-hmm. But when you're in the military, people you're with, even your patients, are your family. Mm-hmm. And I went to a 3-year program that focus. We had 3 months on psychophiliation. So I was there not only to take care of wounds, that was the easy part, but to maybe give hope to some guys with injuries that need a little bit of hope. I always ask them about their home, their life, and got to know them as a person. We had a lot of guys with eye patches on. I used to wear Estee Lauder Youth Dew cologne, and if they knew it was me, they didn't have to say, "What's your name?" And at night, I always had jingle bells, because when you had to wake a patient up, you never wanted to shake them.
Okay.
I know one nurse did, and she ended up getting cold caught.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're still in fight mode. I never let rank control my job.
Expand on that. What does that mean?
I worked. I went to a three-year program. A lot of the nurses went to the four-year program, were less experienced, made more money than us, and tried to lord it over the fact. But I considered us all nurses. Even the doctors, most of us were on first-name basis. Every once in a while, I'd get a GI that didn't want a bed because it was beside someone he didn't want to be beside. And one time, basically, a captain wanted a bed between a dark-complected person and a Mexican. Neither one of these two guys had full use of either arm. This captain had a broken ankle. And he said he wasn't sleeping there. And I said, "Well, that's going to be your bed." And he said, "Well, I'm Captain so-and-so." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, I'm Lieutenant Hamilton. If you don't like this bed, grab a pillow off the laundry cart and sleep outside." He ended up staying there. I wanted him there because he had two hands, and he could help the guys. And he did. And it was true. It was actually the first time I was exposed to prejudice. I grew up in a teeny town, and there was no prejudice. My parents speak inclusion before it was a word in the Webster's dictionary. Funny things did happen. The bigwigs from the states would come to talk to the patients, and they never came to my ward. They didn't want to see blood. They didn't want to see missing limb. They always went to the malaria wards. One day, my supervisor came and "We have to get this place ship-shaped. Someone needs to buff the floor." And I thought, okay, so how does a person with not enough extremities buff a floor? I went to the ward next door, and there was this older dude sitting there, and I said, "Hey, Sarge," I said, "I need the floor buff. Come on over." I said, and I gave my opinion about who was coming from Washington. I said, they don't want to see the guys that are injured. Well, this guy came over, and he was buffing, and he was having a grand old time. And my supervisor walked on the floor, and she blared out, "Lieutenant Hamilton, why do you have the colonel buffing the floor?" The colonel swung that buffer around and almost knocked her over, and used very colorful language to repeat exactly what I had told him. And of course, afterwards, the guys all cheered. I went over to thank him late after that. He was gone. The guys from Washington were coming to pick him up and take him to wherever they were, were going to go venturing next. So funny things did happen, and you made fun when you could. You were your own entertainment.
So you made family overseas and entertainment. And tell us about how many vets are in Rhode Island, and what percentage of that number are women?
There are 68,000 vets in Rhode Island, approximately 8% female. Unfortunately, female veterans traditionally are underrepresented in research. They're starting to get with the program and realize that, hey, we do matter too. So even I know with PTSD, and that's something that's I think a lot about, there are almost 27% of women who served in NAM have PTSD. And in Iraq and Afghanistan, 20% have PTSD. A lot of these people aren't getting services.
Why not?
They don't think they're worthy.
The women themselves?
The women
or
themselves,
the systems?
They cope with it. You know, it was my job, I had to do it. I got diagnosed with PTSD, a very minor, and I mean, I kind of like was, well, no, that's not me.
When was that?
When my facility decided to incorporate IV therapy.
Okay.
I was the experienced person. I could start an IV with my eyes closed, but I still had to go to the program. So I always went early to get a front row seat, and I was early. They said, well, there are coffee and donuts in there, help yourself. I opened the door, and within 30 seconds, my pulse went up to 180. I became cold and clammy. I did a U-turn, I went outside and I sat down and said, what the hell just happened? Then I realized all of the tables had arms for people to practice starting IVs on. And just looking at all of those arms, the brain's a crazy organ. It put me right back there.
Yeah, how old were you, Mary?
55.
Okay.
So, I mean,
yeah.
So it's nothing that, I mean, people with PTSD, it affects their mental health to a point where they really can't function.
Yeah.
And they're sometimes afraid.
Now, where were you at 55?
At 55, I was at Evergreen House in East Providence.
Okay.
In long-term care subacute rehab.
Okay.
I started out in surgical ICU in Pawtucket, but it was a challenge because in the military, you're used to doing more than expected or more than you're trained to do even. And I had a guy with a motorcycle accident that needed 2 units of blood. And the lab brought it up and I hung it. And about 2 hours later, the intern came in and said, where's the blood? And I said, he's had it. Well, don't you realize there's a policy, it needs to be checked by 2 people. I looked at him, I said, sir, I said, I didn't know that. I said, you know, I said, I was in the military. I said, if I waited for someone to check that blood, I said, patients could have bled out. And so I went into long-term care then because they need rock star nurses that care about them too.
Yeah. So, okay, so how old were you when you retired from the military?
21, 26, 27.
Oh, so you were still young. So you entered 22, and then 26, 27. And then you didn't have any symptoms of PTSD for approximately 30 years.
Correct,
wow.
correct.
Wow. And that can happen.
Oh, it can.
As it did to you.
It can.
Yeah.
And I mean, I function perfectly well. It doesn't affect me at all. But there are people, I mean, anxiety, depression, sexual difficulty, and it usually it's from some trauma, either personally or witnessing a trauma.
Yep. Nightmares, flashbacks, hallucinations.
I guess my incident
difficulty controlling anger, emotions.
Absolutely. My incident kind of compared to a person considered shell shock if a car backfires. The guy dives to the road, and that's kind of what I had. And, you know, I think about it now, sure. And of course, I've gotten more verbal talking about my experiences, encouraging other women to talk about their experiences because it's lost.
Yeah. In what settings has that been, that you've spoken to other women and encouraged them to speak out and get help?
Informally.
Okay.
I did the Providence Clemente Veterans Initiative. I spoke there. And then down in Newport at the Cadet Center. And then most recently at the Vietnam and Fall River for their memorial vigil, which indeed was.
You want to share something about your experience there?
I started out by mentioning Sharon Lane, who was the only nurse killed by hostile enemy fire.
Oh, and where was that?
68, 70, about the same time I came in.
Wow.
She must have gone to basic training right after I did.
Was she in a hospital?
She was in one of the medevac hospitals. Mortar fire landed between 2 of the wards, and then she was killed instantly.
Wow.
Of course, they said that we're never going to. You will never be in danger. They said, okay. From there, I went to PTSD and problems with PTSD, suicide. 50% of veterans' death are from suicide.
Yeah.
Which is...
And do you know what percentage of that would be women?
No, I don't. 70% over 50 years old, though.
Wow.
Homelessness amongst women is greater than homelessness amongst men.
I wonder why.
Many of them, when they leave the service, their marriages break up. They might have children. And let's face it, the military pay doesn't really provide you with what you need to function. So it's to me, probably the most important part of speaking is giving other women that, you know, that, hey, maybe I can add something to this. Because the more that's said, the more people that are reluctant to talk will talk. I never thought I'd be on TV.
Here you are.
I have Dora to blame for that, which is
She was our
okay.
guest several weeks ago.
Yeah, and Agent Orange, there were
Oh, would you like to so what did they tell you about Agent Orange initially?
absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Absolutely nothing. And it wasn't until after Kay's death that Donna, in fact, Donna and I have a tradition now, we spend Memorial Day weekend together.
Yeah.
Donna said, you could see this, whatever they were spraying,
So
blowing right over the hospital.
wow. So you would have experienced that in the hospital.
As a nurse,
What did that look like?
Donna said it was just like a mist or a cloud of something.
Orange?
Not-
Or gray? Or
no,
yeah,
just
smoky
not-
color? Yeah.
Just a mist of
A
something.
mist. Okay. Wow.
19 million gallons of the herbicide were sprayed. I believe 60% was Agent Orange, basically to defoliate the trees and get rid of the jungle growth to make it safer for our troops on the ground. And in retrospect, it obviously wasn't. Approximately 2.6 million were exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam, and that's not counting the Vietnam people that were also exposed to Agent Orange. Fortunately, now it's been recognized by the PAC.
Yeah.
That 300,000 deaths from exposure.
And do you know anyone that died due to Agent Orange?
At Evergreen, I probably had 4 or 5 patients that were Vietnam vets. And of course, at that time, they really weren't talking too much about Agent Orange. And it can affect I mean, now the cancers, reproductive problems, and it goes for the bird pits as well, respiratory issues, melanoma, diabetes, Parkinson's, heart disease. And even they have proved that a sperm of a guy that was exposed to Agent Orange may result in a baby with birth defects. So they're still getting answers.
Yeah.
They're still getting answers.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of COVID, my youngest son in Utah said, "Mom, would you do me a favor?"
Okay.
I have a hard time saying no to my youngest son. He said, "Would you write down some of your stories?" Okay. It hasn't been easy.
Yeah. What's the hardest part of writing the stories?
Reliving it.
Oh.
Reliving it. I dropped maybe it was about 4 years ago, I dropped a jar of pasta sauce on the floor. And that night, everything I dreamed about was in red and had arms sticking out of the red. And it's like, you know, I wake up and I say, "Oh, that's really kind of cool." You know, not therapeutic cool, but it's interesting how the brain works. Of all of my nursing career, I have to say, the 20 months I spent in Japan were without a doubt the most wonderful ones. Not because of what I was seeing, but because you really felt like you were making a difference. And I got to know the patients. And I loved working nights because if someone was awake, I'd I'm Irish, I talk, you know, and learning about their personal issues and their fears. Would they be accepted when they went home? And, you know, people say, oh, they were, you know, not treated well. Well, they weren't. I was with a group of guys, and I can tell you, rotten tomato does not wash off clothing.
No.
And when a rotten egg hits you, it smells.
Yeah.
And it just, you know, I mean, that was not a good experience.
Yeah.
They told us, you know, don't wear your uniform when you get off the plane, but when you're carrying a duffel bag, it's like a name tag. I just came from overseas.
So you didn't see any women soldiers, obviously, right? So back in the day, right?
Any what?
Women soldiers back in the day when you were there. No women soldiers, but
Well, no. Well, the nurses were women.
well, okay, yeah, I apologize.
No,
yes.
no, that's okay.
This is true.
No.
Military sexual trauma, that wasn't something that was spoke about.
No.
You
It was
know?
brushed
Were
under
you
the-
aware of it or had a sense or a feeling?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
I wonder what's changed then.
I think women are speaking out.
Okay.
I think that's part of it. And it's becoming more open, generally speaking. I mean, I was never exposed to LGBTQ. I mean, I was never exposed to anything growing up. Like a teeny small town.
Where were you from? Where are you from?
Conneautville, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
And Iroquois, it's Snow Village.
Wow. And where did you go to nursing school?
Hemet Hospital in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Okay. And that's where someone came in and spoke to you, and that you were inspired to go into the military.
The recruiter came in and spoke to us.
Wow.
And we all were, as I say, we were from big families, and we wanted cars. And
Whatever happened to that car? What kind of car did you buy?
I
Buy a
bought-
Mustang?
I'm going to start to cry. There was in our teeny town, there was a lumber mill, and an old gentleman by the name of Fern ran it, and he bought a 1964 jet black Mustang.
Okay.
And I said to my father, and he just drove it back and forth to work. I said to my father, if he ever sells it, I want to buy it.
Okay.
And that's what I bought. Well, I didn't take it to Japan with me.
You didn't?
No, I couldn't imagine driving on the wrong side of the road in a Mustang. Now I probably would have. And my brother had just gotten his license.
Oh boy.
And I don't know where that Mustang is now, except it was
Wow.
not back. I think probably it met an untimely end.
Oh, your brother never told you what became of it?
No, and I never asked him because I knew
Okay.
he'd feel bad. And I think I have to kind of laugh because I never heard about the bad things that happened at home. But by the same token, I wasn't telling them the bad things, and bad, for lack of better, that was happening to me. Because I didn't want them to worry. And of course, they didn't want me to worry. I mean, my letters, my mother saved all the letters, and I read a couple of them, I just threw them away. If I worked day shift, the sunrise over Mount Fuji was beautiful, then I'd go into what I had for breakfast, I never told them about things that happened that I thought would upset them. And every letter started either, the sunrise was out beautiful over Mount Fuji. Our nurse's station window perfectly framed Mount Fuji. And one thing I did do, I had a guy that, he was a captain, no arms, no legs. Every morning I'd find a rolled up washcloth by his bed with a little bit of blood on it. And I didn't know where it came from. And this happened maybe 4 or 5 nights in a row. And the kid in the bed next to him, I said, what's with this? He said, listen, he said, Joe sleeps with that rolled in his mouth because he doesn't want to wake anybody up with his screams in his sleep. Because all he could see was the Viet Cong standing over him with a rifle waiting to finish him off. And then all of a sudden, see this splurt of blood and a noise. Well, the Huey that was picking him up shot the Vietnam guy. But he couldn't get that out of his mind. Well, that morning, at maybe a half an hour before Fuji was rising, I went in, I said, I've got a job for you. I picked him up, got him in a wheelchair, I hurt my back, but that was okay. That was the first time I hurt my back. And took him into the nurse's station. I turned off all the lights. And I said, I just want you to watch out the window. I did that 5 nights in a row. The 6th night, I took him the washcloth. And he said, I don't think I need it anymore. Because it accomplished, he was visualizing the beauty of the mountain as opposed to the injury that was happening.
The horror of his injuries, yeah.
Or just like a guy that had a 4-year star quarterback on his high school team, had a whole 4-year scholarship to Ohio State, but lost his throwing arm.
Oh, wow.
And he felt sorry for himself. And he was really, I needed him to realize that he still had a voice. And so I did something that might have backfired. I said, I need something taken down to the lab. He said, he said, well, I don't know where it is. I said, I'll draw you a map. And I sent him purposely through the neurosurgical ward, which I was glad I didn't work on. He didn't speak to me for about 3 days. And the 4th day he came up and he said, listen, ma'am. I said, please, my name's Mary. I always went by my first name. I said, listen, I said, do you know why I sent you? He said, I sent you there because you might not be able to throw a football, but I said, you have a passion for football and there are a lot of young kids that you could mentor. And so he was okay. I think the worst part about that assignment was you never found out how the guys did once they got on that Silverbird home. And it's kind of like a void in your life. And anytime I see someone that's a vet, you can spot a Vietnam vet a mile away if you lived the experience. And they have so much respect for me, so much respect, and they were treated absolutely horribly, absolutely. And even, in my small town, I went to the bank, and one of my classmates, one of my best friends, was one of the tellers. And when she saw me come in, she put a closed sign in front of her door because she thought I supported the war. So it was an interesting time in history. I have to say,
it must have been, yeah.
From there, Fort Bragg, I was night supervisor for 3 months, and then in charge of a major mail ward, and that wasn't very much. It didn't have anything really to do with Vietnam. A couple of guys with recuperating injuries, but I always had wanted to go someplace that I knew I wouldn't be able to go to any place else. My father always told me, the Army's never going to send you where you want to go. So when I went to DC on an administrators conference and it was time to update my dream sheet, I put 3 places in Germany, and then in big block letters at the bottom, I do not want to go to Ethiopia.
And guess where you went?
Bingo.
Bingo.
I had outsmarted Uncle Sam, and I was proud.
Well.
And another girl that did the same thing. That's who I had coffee with the first morning there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming, Mary. We can't wait to hear more stories. So I hope that you're putting together a little book.
I am.
Good.
I am.
Good. Thank you for watching State of the State. I'm Darlene DeRezzo. Please find us on social media. We have a new Instagram account at State of the State RI. And thank you again, Mary. Happy Women's Veterans Day to you and to all the women out there that served.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.